Alhamdulillah. Praise be to Allah. And peace be upon all his prophets and messengers, alayhimus salam, and especially upon the last of them all, Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Dear brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A'udhu billahi min shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. فَضَرَبْنَا عَلَىٰ آذَانِهِمْ فِي الْكَهْفِ سِنِينَ عَدَدًا. Suratul-Kahfi, Surah number 18, ayat number 11. But as we had discussed in our previous verse, it is important that we take a pause and reflect. We have just done with the translation of the first 10 verses, and I had said that there is something we need to talk about. We are again at a very critical juncture. We discussed on similar lines after completing the first 3 verses, about which there are various hadiths, and we have discussed that. So this hadith is about the importance of the first 10 verses, and I have discussed all of that as well. And now the more important point is not the hadith itself per se, but why. I mean, reading Surah Kahf, Suwratul-Kahfi in its entirety is what is required as a rule. The first 10 verses or the last 10 verses would be the concession, and the first 3 verses would be an exception. We know that by now. But even then, so this part, the first 10 verses, why is that hadith even there? One way to look at it, okay, if you cannot follow the rule in one of the weeks, then at least try to read the first 10 verses or the last 10 verses. But why is that? So since we have already read through the translations of the first 10 verses, we can, if we reflect on the verses, begin to understand and appreciate as to some of the reasons, possible reasons as to why this is so. In verse number 10, if you remember, we have the dua. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً وَهَيِّئْ لَنَا مِنْ أَمْرِنَا رَشَدًا. And what is the meaning of this dua? What is the translation? O our Lord, bestow upon us mercy specially from thyself, and facilitate for us in the matter of our affair in a rightly guided way. I mean, in Akhir Zaman, there cannot be a better dua than this. So in Akhir Zaman, to protect us from the fitna of the Dajjal, we are reminded. So verse number 10, first 10 verses, I mean, if we are able to read the first 10 verses, we are reminded of the dua. So that acts as a reminder. And what a powerful dua this is. And no better time than Akhir Zaman that this dua is even more relevant. So if we just focus on the text of the dua, the meaning of the dua, the translation of the dua, it becomes so much more profound. Okay. Another point is verses 9 and 10. So the arrangement, so now verse number 9 marked the beginning of the story of al-Kahfi. The story of al-Kahfi, right? The people of the cave, the companions of the cave, from which the surah derives the name. Fine. So why is the first 10 verses mentioned in the hadith? It cuts the story into 2 parts. What sense does it make? Normally when we structure, so I said that what is the arrangement of this surah? The arrangement is there is a message, there is a story, 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 and then there is a message. So if you have followed carefully, there are 5 stories and there are 6 messages. So wouldn't it be more sensible to segregate out the first 8 verses where there is an introductory message, so to say, and cluster verse number 9 onwards, which marks the beginning of story number 1? Wouldn't that be more sensible? Why is the first 10 verses mentioned then? I have already said one reason. Verse number 10, if you're able to read through, then at least the dua you're reminded. And what a powerful dua for all of us to be reminded. And if you're in the habit of reading the entire surah every week, then once we reach here, we just a flashback occurs in our memory. So that's what happens. Now, there is two more important points, very interesting points. So how many verses are there in the Quran? I don't want to go into a detailed discussion about this. It can become very complicated. We can deal with it in a separate session, in a separate lecture. It's a separate topic altogether. But if you, I mean, just to give a basic background, if you are totally unaware, you will not be able to appreciate that. So there is a hadith which says that there are 6,666 ayat, verses in the Quran. And when we read the Quran, when we open up the present Musaf of the Quran and count the number of verses, it adds up to 6,236. Is part of the Quran missing then? No way. That's not the case. What is happening? Where is this discrepancy coming about from? So as I said, this is going to be a long discussion. To cut it short, some people, they suggest that count the Bismillah Rahman Rahim at the beginning of each surah as a verse, right? And I'm aware that Surah Tawbah doesn't have Bismillah Rahman Rahim at the beginning. To compensate for that, in Surah Naml, in the middle, this phrase Bismillah Rahman Rahim appears. So those are different, stories. We need not go into all those details now. So if we add these 114, so to say, phrases as verses, as ayat, then the count increases somewhat. Even then, it doesn't become 6,666. We'll not discuss this point. We'll cover it. We will discuss it in a separate lecture session. But if you were to count Bismillah Rahman Rahim as the verse number 1 of Suwratul-Kahfi as well, then verse number 9, what is our verse number 9, would then become verse number 10. What happens in that case is, at least you touch the story of the companions of the cave. And once that story comes, again as a flashback, that the story and the dua in the story and indeed the entire chapter, entire surah comes as a flashback to your memory. This was point number 2. And point number 3 is, the first 2 verses of this story, verse number 9 and 10, isn't actually dealing with the story. Whatever information was given is repeated again. So that we can call a pre-introduction to this story. So why do I call it pre-introduction, not the introduction to the story? That's interesting, and we'll cover that discussion as well. But it suffices us at this point of time to say that acts as a pre-introduction to the story. And verse number 9 and verse number 10 is what we've already gone through in our translation in the previous 2 sessions. So this was a brief discussion that was required for us to appreciate to appreciate the phase where we have reached in our discussion on Surah al-Kahf, and hence and now we can take this surah forward as we proceed. And verse number 11 is so profound. I fear that this verse, this session is going to be a bit long, but some of the sessions does become a bit long. We can't help it. If there is a need for that, it has to be that way. We can't avoid that. And if there is no need for a longer discussion, we will keep it short. But verse number 11 is one such verse which needs an elaborate and in-depth. There is, we will see. Let's proceed with the translation of this verse. فَضَرَبْنَا, so profound. Each of these words, it seems, فَضَرَبْنَا عَلَىٰ آذَانِهِمْ فِي الْكَهْفِ سِنِينَ عَدَدًا. It seems just how many? فَضَرَبْنَا is one construct, عَلَىٰ آذَانِهِمْ is another construct, construct 2, فِي الْكَهْفِ is the third construct, and سِنِينَ عَدَدًا is the fourth construct. Just 4 constructs in this verse, 4 phrases, if you may. But if you look at the translation itself on screen, it's verbose. We could not avoid any of the words written in the English language. it's not my whims and fancies that those were included. It's not a flowery language which I needed to demonstrate as part of my capabilities for which I have included those additional words. No, all of these are necessary, and we'll explain that now. Fa darabna. Fa is so. Daraba is a verb, and na is the attached pronoun. I mean, it's not even an attached pronoun. The verb includes the pronoun. The verbal form in Arabic includes the pronoun. So, for example, the basic verbal pattern is fa'ala, fa'alna. He did and we did. So, similarly, fataha, fatahna, nasara, nasarna, daraba, darabna. So, let's explain, because by looking at the screen, you might get a bit confused. What is that D with a subscript SW and a dot, then ARABA within quotes, because that's in Arabic, the transliteration. I have failed to substitute an English word for that specific word, right? Daraba. And the explanation requires a bracket which comes immediately after that. So let me give you a brief background about how verbs work. So for example, if we say Nasara, he helped, what it essentially means, he did the act of helping. He ate, he did the act of eating, right, in the past tense. So daraba is a past tense, and darabna is the plural form. So we did something. So we helped. So we did something. What is that? We did the act of helping. So darabna, we is obviously in reference to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is stating that we did something. We did daraba. Now you might say that daraba, the basic meaning is hit, to hit, or he hit. Daraba, he hit. Darabna, we hit. So if we translate it like that, we hit upon the ears, what does it even mean, right? So as in, all languages, there are nuances associated with how a word can be used in different contexts. Similar is the case of daraba over here. Okay, so what exactly happened, right? Let me try to explain that in a little bit more, but before that, so I have mentioned in the screen, in the translation, so we did daraba. I have transliterated zod as DSW dot. The dot indicates the dot in the letter itself, in the Arabic alphabet letter, zod. So that is my representation of zod, because that sound is not present in the English language. I do not know how best to represent that. So that's a representation. Okay. Daraba. We did daraba. Now, what does it mean? What is the implication of that word? Let's first try to understand that. That is, so daraba is an act. That is an act of transcendental extra-dimensional reality. So we did something. Ala azanihim, upon their ears. Okay, we did something upon their ears. Ala azanihim. Fil kahfi. Very interesting, very interesting. In the cave. In the last verse, it says ala al-Kahfi. Sorry, it was ila al-Kahfi, to the cave, or towards the cave, and I explained that. So here, fil kahfi. So now they're in the cave. Now they're not on their onwards journey towards the cave. No, now they're in the cave, right? Now they're in the cave, and while they were in the cave, Allah did something upon their ears, to their ears. So whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did, which is an act of transcendental extra dimension reality, whatever that means, that is the best that I could do to explain the meaning of daraba. I'll explain it a little bit more. Don't worry. Just be patient and be with me. So, as a result of that act by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon the youths, something happened. What exactly happened is what I have mentioned again in the brackets, after upon their ears, as a result of which they were in a sound state of absolute rest. As a result of which they were in a sound state of absolute rest. There's a play of words, there's a pun over there. Soundless, sound. The second sound, obviously not sound as in noise or something like that. It's a state. Sound, good. So soundless, sound state of absolute rest. Now, you cannot translate that as some translators or scholars have translated as sleep. You can't do that. I'll explain that as well when the time comes in one of the next verses. The opportunity will arise for me to be able to explain that why it's not rest. It's a state of absolute rest, right? Now, this state is different from being awake. It's different from death. It's different from sleep. It's different from barzakh. It's different from what happens maybe in a state of coma. So it's a completely different state in which they were transferred into or transformed into. Transferred, I think, is a better word. Transferred to. It's a state they were put into, right? In the cave, while they were in the cave. Let me complete the English translation and then we go back to the nuances. Sinina adadan, the representative translation, more than half of the translations seems to suggest, I mean, they have translated for a number of years. And a number of years is a very bad translation because it's not an idafa construct. The off comes in between if it's an idafa construct. For example, Rasulu Allahi, the first word is sort of not the standard form. It's not Rasulun. I mean, I don't know how best to explain. If you don't know Arabic, it'll be a bit difficult to catch, understand fully what's happening. And the second word is Allahi. It's in the jar status. So other than is definitely not in the jar status, right? And so it's not an idafa construct. So it cannot be translated. The grammar does not allow that it be translated as a number of years. That's out. So how best is it translated? It's translated for years. Sinina is the plural form for year, sun. So that's the plural, I should say, nasab form, the object form. So for how long were they in that state? They were in that state for years, and that years is clarified by the word other than a certain number. And it was a certain number of years, right? So years, a certain number. And the construct itself, the language, the usage, the choice of words, the choice of construct is so remarkable. For years, a certain number, suggesting that it's a certain number. Okay, but that number is not required for you to know at this point of time. We'll discuss that. So I said just now that verse number 9 and 10 sort of acts as a pre-introduction to the story. Verse number 11 and 12, I'll have to give it out, otherwise it will not make sense, acts as the introduction to the story. And why do I say that? We will understand that too when we reach verse number 13. So you have to be with me through these verses, right? So for years, a certain number. Look at the beauty of the translation itself, and then you will be able to understand and appreciate how much more beautiful the construct in Arabic really is. Look at this. So we did daraba, that is an act of transcendental exclamation reality upon the ears, as a result of which they were in a soundless, sound state of absolute rest in the cave for years, a certain number. Right. So now we'll have to go back. Now, when we sleep, is it always sound sleep, a good sleep? No. So many times what happens, so I said sleep because they were not in a state of sleep. So as a result of whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did, they were not put to sleep. That is what I'm trying to emphasize again and again and again. So when we sleep, the external noise from the environment sometimes reaches us and it interferes with our sleep and it integrates into the dreams and it sometimes disturbs us. So whatever Allah did, the result was that state they were in was a state of absolute rest. They were in a sound state, in a good state, and that state was soundless, noise-free, noise cancellation, if you may, in modern parlance, modern jargon or terminology. Okay, so what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? Now, okay, daraba, you would say the basic meaning is hit. So, did Allah hit? So, for example, if we consider two friends, A hit B, full stop. So A is the subject and B is the object and hit is the verb. In Arabic, we would say, whatever, leave that. So it will become too complex. Arabic has its own mechanism. So the verb comes first, and then the ism, which is in the rafa status, is the subject, and then the ism, which is in the nasab status, is the object. Leave that aside. So, can there be other meanings for daraba? Sure, there can be. And it is not the primary meaning, or I cannot say primary, it's not the basic meaning which is intended over here. He hit, that's not the intended meaning. I'll give you two examples. The first example would not be very appropriate over here. The second one would be more appropriate, but let me start with the lesser of the two examples. So if you hit someone on their ear with a very hard hit, does it appear to him that for a while his sense of hearing is impacted and he is not able to hear any external sound? So that is a way in which the external noise can be cut off. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not hit them, to suggest that he hit them hard is even more of a misfit. It's not what exactly we are trying to, or the verse tries to convey. But I have given a secondary sort of nuance to how this word daraba can imply different meanings, and we are trying to reach there. The third meaning is, so the first meaning he hit is out of question. The second meaning is my way of explaining that alternate meanings can sometimes be used in the context for a more suitable or a plausible explanation, which is still not up to the mark. When we consider it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who did the act of daraba upon the youths, then definitely that's not the case. But that's just the explanation of how this word can be used and how different actions has certain consequences or impacts or effects. So cause and effect that we're trying to explain. The third one is, the example 2 is, the first one is the basic meaning. The second one is example 1. The third meaning is example 2. So have you ever seen a mother put her baby to sleep by patting lightly upon the baby's ears? Sure, we have experienced that, witnessed that, right? So the daraba can also be used in that sense. So did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do that, or is he trying to explain that through an example? The third example is closer in meaning to what is a more plausible explanation for the intent of the word used. But my suggestion is the fourth meaning, and for which I don't have an equivalent word in the English language. And that is the act which I have referred to. That is an act of transcendental extra-dimensional reality. We will never be able to understand what it is. But step by step, in a gradation, we have tried to approach that reality, what it can mean. The fourth, we don't. So another example would be, we understand 0-dimensional, 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. The world around us is 3-dimensional. We are 3-dimensional. But is there fourth spatial dimension? Sure, there is. But we do not have the faculties. The human beings have not been given such faculties to penetrate the reality of the fourth spatial dimension. I'm talking about 4 dimensions as time. I'm not talking about that. The fourth spatial dimension as a reality, it exists as physics suggests, but we do not have the faculties. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given us such faculties to appreciate that. So similarly, the fourth meaning, we cannot fully comprehend. It's beyond us. But we are trying to get a sense of that through this 4-step or 4-phase or 4-stage gradation approach. So I hope I was able to do justice to this verse. And one more thing. So we exactly can never figure out what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did. But what was the result of that? What was the result of that cause? What was the effect? The effect, that is why I have put in, as a result of which they were in a soundless sound state of absolute rest. So this is it then. What I'll do is, so I hope that we've been able to do at least some more justice than any of the existing translations were able to do. So the existing translations, forget about doing justice to the Arabic text. They have not even rendered it correctly according to the linguistics, the Quranic Arabic, the requirements of that itself. So they fall short of that. Anyway, so I hope that I have been able to do some justice to the Arabic construct this verse, and the pending discussions related to verse number 10, which I've tried to cover. So that and verse number 11, with which we conclude, but we will just read through, as has become our habit or practice, the Arabic and the English in a free flow running translation. فَضَرَبْنَا عَلَى آذَانِهِمْ فِي الْكَهْفِ سِنِينَ عَدَدًا. So we did Zoraba, that is an act of transcendental extra-dimensional reality upon their ears, as a result of which they were in a sound state of absolute rest in the cave for years, a certain number. So that's it then. We'll proceed in the next session with verse number 12.